we will upload that one during this day, so you can check the project and place creation instructions. So there you go, Kara.
Okay, yeah, so we are gathered here today for the digital storytelling story maps workshop. So we have, as a collective, as a group, we have access to the ArcGIS Storymaps platform, which we created as a River Collective, one story map last year. I might get Azan to be muted. Yeah, so that's really awesome because this year we already have 68 locations all around the world, which is already a huge step up from last year where we had 40 locations. And throughout last year, we had lots of photographers and a lot of people documenting all of their Home River Bioblitzes, not only just with the phone and the iNaturalist, but with photographers and various audio recordings and interviews and all sorts of things. So this year we really wanted to be able to give you guys the power to be able to tell your own narrative and your own story. So if you haven't been to the Home River Bioblitz story map from last year, I'll click that into the link in the morning, but just now. But basically the story map goes through various different species and allows you to sort of visually tell the story about what your citizen science event is about, and also about who was running it. And these aspects are really important in storytelling. So we'd really like to be able to open that up to you guys. And so this workshop will be a little bit with an input from Jens about environmental storytelling, and then also an input in access to the ArcGIS Storymaps platform, which I will technically be able to give you some basics into that platform and show some bit of examples, because each of you guys will be able to have access to that in a sort of structured way. And we'll also go over through field preparation and house rules for actually all doing this together. So Jens is an expert in environmental storytelling. So he'll say a couple of words. We have lots of sort of environmental communication projects, and he'll kind of just give a bit of input. So Jens, feel free to take it away. And I've popped in the story maps from last year, so you can take a scroll through that.
Oh, do you see this?
I can see it.
Okay, nice. So yeah, I will try to keep it short. So then we go to the more practical part of it, and I mind, because some of you are also National Geographic explorers, you have some experience, but storytelling is something that not everybody actually in the daily life is aware of the theoretical part behind it, but for sure it's something that everybody does all the time.
¿Puedo mandar un link de una reunión de Zoom a ver si tú cachai un poco?
Okay, exactly. Like for sure that somebody was telling a story and interrupted me. Yeah, it's the way we communicate. This is a little image of the Little Red Riding Hood, la Caperucita Roja in Spanish. It's girl that had to go to the grandmother, and yeah, there's the wolf that tries to get the food, and yeah, so this is a story that many people are aware of. And what's interesting is that stories have been around since early humans, and this story has around 58 variants in 33 cultures. So we can see that stories are spread all around the world, and sometimes the topics, the themes repeat themselves. I will play a little game with you all. I will show you a 1-minute video, and I want you then to tell me. You can write down on the chat, or just turn your mic on and tell me what's about after the video finishes. So what did you see on this video? Does somebody want to say something? You may feel free to turn your mic on.
Bullying.
Bullying. Who was bullying who?
Yeah, well, for me, like the big triangle was not being nice to the little dot and the other little triangle, but well, at the end it was like quite intense. I don't know if he was dealing with frustration or he has some unresolved issues. I don't know about triangle psychology, sorry.
Thank you, Carlos. Does anybody agree with Carlos on the bullying thing, or did somebody see something differently? Feel free to turn your mic on.
Vikram, I think you're mute. Your mic is up.
So, like, I think the bigger one wants the smaller triangle to be inside that box, and somehow that the circle get entered into the bigger box, and then something happened. Like, but the bigger triangle wants that small one to get inside. That's what I have observed.
Cool. Well, I think what we just, I agree. When the first time I saw this video, I thought, well, this is a drama, like these shapes are fighting each other, and it's, but the logical answer is basically those are shapes and they are moving around on a screen, nothing else. You know, what we are doing is we are interpreting this whole sequence of shapes, only shapes, with a drama and a story. Bullying, the one figure is bullying the other one, we give them characters, emotions, we identify with them, and that's creating a story. So we basically create a story out of shapes, and that's the way we understand reality. This is a very interesting research that Haider and Simmel did in the 40s. Yeah, most of the people answered the same way Carlos and Vikram answered. Seldom people were like, well, these are just shapes moving on the screen. It's very strange to just answer like that. Maybe if you're a mathematician, I don't know, maybe that's a prejudice. And it's this idea of this apparent behavior we observe on things. And that's basically storytelling. Storytelling, it's a way of thinking, a way of shaping reality. I really like this quote from a really nice article about the story of storytelling. And the thing about storytelling, it's that it's an ancient way of connecting human experiences, and also it's an ancient way of memories, to sharing collective memories of danger, for example, poison plants, poison fungi, or dangers in the mountains, or also places to go for food, or also histories of the creation of the world, and that's all storytelling. And basically, it's also a way to connect to our emotions. There are many studies that have shown that storytelling also, connecting through our emotions, move people to action. And many times, depending on what type of story you are reading, this may be also a pro-environmental action. In that sense, there is a very famous book that maybe some of you know, which is called Silent Spring from Rachel Carson. She was a chemist, a scientist, and also an environmental advocate who wrote about the effect of pesticides on agriculture and also on natural ecosystems. And she had such a powerful storytelling skill that she actually inspired a whole generation of environmental advocates, people that through this book realized the impact of pesticides on the land, not only from a data point of view, not only because Rachel Carson was able also to show effective proof about the impact of pesticides on human health or ecosystems, but also the way she wrote, and if you take a look into the book, is very emotional. In that sense, I think when we all here talk about storytelling, sometimes we forget that it's also a strategic to tell a story. Not all the stories you hear are just improvised. Many of them have a structure that has been thoroughly thought. And this is easy, you find this in any place, these questions, but I also use them sometimes to remind myself what I'm telling, who am I telling this and why, and so on. So who is the audience? What is the message? Why I am telling this? Why is the real reason? I want to share my values, maybe, for what? In my case, in environmental storytelling is mostly, I have these specific pro-environmental goals. For example, in the case of rivers, it's conservation of rivers, and how is also in this case, story maps. Maybe this presentation is also a way of telling stories, Instagram stories, and so on. Just briefly to remind you all, and this is very important, nowadays we don't speak too much about a general audience, which is something that people used to do a lot, but of segmented audiences. There are many studies that have been segmented audiences. For example, this study in Switzerland segmented audiences in people that are very interested in science, people that are mildly interested in science, people that are actually not interested at all in science, and also their characteristic features. For example, the very interested people are they are always looking for new information about different topics related to biology, physics, but the disengaged are, of course, not that active, and they use this segmentation of audiences to also understand who may be most possibly supporting scientific endeavors or support from the government in the population in Switzerland. And when you write, for example, an article, or you're telling a story, and if you have the most engaged people in science, of course, your message will be different if you're trying to convince somebody that's not that interested, for example, about talking about climate change. And in this sense, it's also important to understand what's a narrative. So the narratives are actually the core of the storytelling processes. A narrative is this way of how we present the facts or how we present stories, the structure of the story. And narrative is therefore the way we understand reality. For example, the narrative of climate change is one, and there are now these so-called non-believers that don't believe in climate change, and that's also a narrative. In the end, is how we tell these stories to each other. And there is also this possibility of reframing narratives, which is very powerful. This is the reason why storytelling is a key feature at the moment, but that is also dangerous. You can shape reality in many ways, like we saw. We can make stories about, for example, river conservation, but we can make racist stories. We can make stories about xenophobia and how, for example, people that come to our countries are not good people. And that's the danger of storytelling as well. And we have to be aware of the dangers. But we also have the power of reframing narratives, for example, from an anthropocentric understanding of the reality to a more ecocentric one. In this sense, what we do in the magazine where I work, for example, it's in Spanish, we don't talk about climate change itself, we talk about the climate crisis to give a sense of urgency. Climate change is not enough. That it's like an idea of this happening every time, it's cyclical. Many people say, well, whatever, it's going to happen again. It has happened before. The crisis makes a call for action. It's urgency. That's a reframing using words process. For example, and this is more of an idea of ecocentric narratives, we don't talk about ecosystem services, which imply functions from services from ecosystems to humans. We talk about ecosystem functions, which is basically ecosystems work like a system and they are functional, and it's not only for humans. Those are ways. For example, natural resources, which imply always nature is made for humans to be extracted. We talk about the common goods, which are not only for humans, but all the species on Earth, and so on. So this idea of progress, for example, is more of an industrialization. And there are many ways of only with words, but also other ways to reframe narratives, in this case from more pro-environmental behavior. And this is a really nice video that I will show you, and then Kara can contextualize a bit more than this also framing of narratives.
Have you ever noticed that all these villains seem a bit queer? I'm Denny, your substitute teacher for today's Rainbow History class, and I'm going to tell you the history of the queer-coded villain. Let's go back to 1930s Hollywood. The sparkly new film industry came out with something called the Hays Code, which was a set of rules as to what could and couldn't be shown on film. And yes, homosexuality was on the list. The code ended in the 60s, but depicting homosexuality remained taboo. This meant that certain characters had to be coded as queer. This usually entailed making male characters appear feminine and feminine characters appear masculine, but never explicitly mentioning their sexuality. This was still stigmatized. However, it was frowned upon much less if these characters were framed negatively, like being a despicable villain, for example. This created a blueprint for a villain that's become ingrained. Disney loved this trope, often depicting evil characters as camp and effeminate compared to more masculine heroes.
Well, Cara, you gave me a really nice explanation of the video because you understand it way better than me.
Sure. I can so break it down as basically in the US, in the film industry, in the 50s, there was they prohibited anything that was homosexual or queer in the film industry. Then they broke that law, and so it was then allowed to show homosexuality into film industry, but they did that and putting that only in evil characters, so depicted as negative. So I think what Jens in this film is trying to portray is that you can take a certain narrative and it can create certain other aspects that reproduce and represent as good or bad in storytelling. Correct?
Beautifully said, exactly. And just one more historic example of reframing narratives. This is a city in the States in the 20th century. You see it's basically full of people on the street, like it's pedestrians, right? And then you see some cars there, more than cars are like these, I don't know, wagons, I think it's a word in English, but like carruajes. And it's basically, the city was made for people, humans, and horses and wagons. And what happened is that's also when the car industry started producing massively cars. So nobody knew that how dangerous cars were. So between 1901 and 1923, the car accidents rised up really, really fast, and people were really upset at cars. And even if you were hit by a car, then the car automatically was the driver was guilty of the crime and had to show that actually had to show something. And what happened, the car industry saw this and they started lobbying. They started lobbying into trench fires in the Congress to make a bill to show that to always put the car driver as the innocent one and the pedestrian as the guilty person, and that has to show when it's run by a car that actually was the car fault, which was the other way around. And they also started a really strong media campaign to show that pedestrians that cross the city in any part, I mean, the city was for pedestrians, are guilty of not understanding how the new modern city must be used. And they were being called jaywalkers. So the jaywalker is basically, you say that to somebody that doesn't know how to walk in the city. So that crosses the city on any part, doesn't respect red lamps and so on. But this invent of red lamps and cars is really, really new. The jaywalker is actually the original walker, the one who only walks everywhere in the city because the city was for the pedestrians. So the car industry changed the narrative from a city for pedestrians, for people that walk, to a city that is owned, and we all can see that nowadays, by the car. So the car nowadays has way more street than the pedestrians, and the pedestrians must follow really strict rules on where to cross, or else they also may be fined, and they are jaywalkers. Reframing narratives, powerful, dangerous. And this is also an understanding of rivers as natural resources. This is Trongol River in South Chile, where I come from. It was a river. Now you see its shapes. We could tell a story about shapes here because it was completely destroyed for sand mining. And basically, there's no more riverbed. There's no more river, only sand everywhere, and no river plants. It's for me, this is an ecocide. It's impressively sad. So I just call upon like reframing narratives, in this case, from this understanding of rivers as natural resources to wild, free-flowing rivers as healthy ecosystems that are important for the planet and for every species on the planet. So thank you. That was narratives, storytelling introduction. There you
Okay,
go.
that was really awesome. And if anyone has any comments, then feel free to turn on your mic. But I think the the message here really is that storytelling is incredibly powerful, and we all have those tools. And story maps is one of those.